Hello, Cook With Me crew, and welcome back to another session of Cook With Me where we get to make brownies. Oh my gosh, I love brownies, and I'm so happy that many of you voted to have special desserts on Cook With Me. So even though we're not necessarily going to make you dinner right now, we're going to make the special thing you can eat after whatever you're having for dinner. And on top of that, because it's a batch of brownies, hopefully you can cut them into extra tiny pieces and leave them in your freezer for another day. So please let me know who's cooking with us tonight, who's joining in. Do we have any kids that are going to be kind of observing a little bit more closely than usual because now we're doing a sweet treat? These brownie recipes are gluten-free, egg-free, so they can be sent to school, and nut-free as well. That's how I designed them. And they are still just as gooey on the inside and crisp on the outside. So this is, I guess I want to show you how easy it can be and how much we can do for saving efficiency if something like brownies is a staple in your household. All right, so let's get into it. We're actually going to be able to punch this recipe out really quickly, which might give you a bit more time to sort out dinner and then have this for dessert later once it's finished cooking. But I will say when it comes to brownies, they do perform much better and taste, I think, much better if you let them cool fully before you cut into them. I know it takes supreme amount of self-discipline, but it does taste a lot better once they've had a chance to cool and get a little bit fudgy and oh, yum. Anyways, and we're going to be packing a bunch of berries into this as well. So 200 grams is a fair amount of berries, but that way we're going to get the extra antioxidants and the extra deliciousness from that too, not just relying on chocolate and a heap of sugar. Not going to go there. Okay, so first steps first, we will need to get the saucepan going with the coconut cream. And the trick with that, we're going to heat that up so that when we put the chocolate in, it's going to take care of the melting for us. Then we mix together all the dry ingredients, put them together in the pan, in the oven, done. Very easy. So come on back with me. If you haven't already got all your ingredients out, let's get the coconut cream that we're going to be putting into the saucepan as well as your coconut oil. And we're going to bring the chocolate. Actually, before we go over there, first of all, let's weigh out our chocolate just to make sure that we've got the right amount. Now, if you haven't already got yourself a set of kitchen scales, I would highly recommend getting a set, and preferably a good quality set, because once you start using them and learn how to use them in most recipes, you kind of, I think you'll prefer it to weighing things out and making sure that the kind of the exact measurement in a cup by volume. It's so much easier to just throw it in there and go by weight. So I've just kind of got that there for you so we can both see that. Okay. So when it comes to chocolate, we're going to need 200 grams. Now, the easier way to do it is if you're using 2 brand new bars, that's 100 grams, that's 100 grams, we could use that. I'm going to be kind of cleaning up a couple other bits of chocolate that I have lying around. So let's see how much we have here. And this chocolate is what they call couverture chocolate, which is French for covering chocolate or cooking chocolate. And basically it means that it hasn't been perfectly shinied up, and it's just meant for cooking. So generally it's a lot less expensive. So try and get a nice dark chocolate for this recipe. So we've only got 153 there. So that means we're going to have to add another half a block of this guy. That's a little bit of an easy way to do it. And we'll let the melting do the rest of the work. There we go. So 203 grams. I'm going to call that good. And then, now that we've got that weighed out, we can go back to the saucepan. Okay, come on back with your chocolate, your coconut cream, your coconut oil, and we'll get this happening here. Okay, so let's get a little bit of heat into the saucepan. And while we think of that, I'm just going to turn it on to medium for now, let that warm up. Because we're going to be fairly quick, let's turn the oven on too and get that preheated. So about 180 degrees, you could go a slight touch bit higher, 180 degrees, and we'll make sure that the rack is in the position so the brownies can cook in the middle of the oven for the most even amount of heat distribution around it. Okay, and grab your recipe so that we don't make any little errors there. We're going to use the full 400 grams, or 400 mils in this case, of coconut cream. And don't waste that bit on the lid, that's the best part. So for that, you just need a spatula. There we go. No waste. Waste not, want not. And the rest of the tin goes in. So we'll just gently heat this. I just have it on medium. And we're just going to let this warm up. We're going to give it a stir every now and then. And And what we're trying to just do is just warm it up enough to melt the coconut oil and the chocolate into it. So there we've got all the little bits of coconut cream out of the tin. Woo! Do a little dance. Coconut oil, 3 tablespoons. If you haven't already got your measuring spoons out, you could have saved a step by putting this into the chocolate and doing it by weight, which is why I gave you the weight there. But I'm just going to go an approximate 3 tablespoons. It's nice and warm here today, you can tell. Whew. There we go. Doesn't need to be super exact. Gotta get messy in the kitchen. It's not fun if you don't. Okay, so we've got our coconut cream, our coconut oil. We're gonna wait until the end to put the vanilla in because vanilla can be quite volatile and we'll lose a lot of the vanilla, believe it or not, the vanilla flavor, if we put it in and then overheat it. So the vanilla is gonna go in at the end. And while this is heating, we could just go nice and slowly, not rush anything, and we'll let the chocolate melt in with that. However, if you put the chocolate in at this stage, you will definitely have to stir this more regularly. So I think because knowing me, I'm probably going to forget that while I start talking. I'm actually going to save that for once this is already hot, and then we can just stir it in and keep that going. So I'm just going to let that sit there without the lid on, and we're going to let that heat just nice and gently on medium. And then let's go back and mix up all of our dry ingredients together. And I'm going to show you how to be able to do this in a much more efficient way so that you can, like I said before, if brownies are a staple in your house, or they become a staple now that you've seen a slightly healthier way to do them, then you can make yourself a premix. So because there are a lot of jars here, I understand it looks a little bit, I don't want to say complicated, but like a little bit more work every time you were to go to make brownies. So in order to make your job simpler, and provided you know that you love this recipe and you're going to be having it again and again, make yourself a double, triple, quadruple batch of just the dry ingredients, put it back into a jar in your pantry and call it brownie premix. And then the next time you go to make brownies, all you have to do is melt everything in the pot, grab your premix and add the measured amount. So it's very, very easy that way. Okay, so the other little bit of a skill I'm going to teach you while we're doing this one is the difference between going by volume and going by weight. So I want to show you the difference. This is kind of a cool experiment. Now, it's not going to be shown as much in this case because we're not going to be using, say, for example, a whole cup of regular flour. But when it comes to something like the coconut flour, let's just use that one as an example. So a half of a cup of coconut flour. Had we measured the conventional way, the way that you would do that is you would scoop. First of all, you'd kind of fluff it so it's not been compacted in the jar. Then we would scoop it into the cup. This is the proper, dare I say, quote unquote, proper way to measure flours in volume. So we need to scoop it into the cup, not put the cup into the container. And then we need to level that off flat. Make sure that that's nice and full. Make yourself a nice, good mess in the kitchen so you know that they're going to taste better when you get there. This is the proper way to measure by volume. Let's see how much that weighs. So that's bang on 47 grams. And this scale is accurate to 1 gram as long as we're under a kilo, it's accurate to 1 gram. So that's 47 grams. Now watch what happens if we'd have done the little scoopy trick, like a lot of people do, which I do as well, which is why I go by weight. So if we'd have done the little scoop trick, fill that cup, level it out. Some people like to give a little tap tap. Now, like I said before, coconut flour is not the best example of this because it doesn't compact as much as a lot of the grain-based flours, but let's see the difference. Maybe it'll prove me wrong with coconut and it'll be totally not different at all. So we've zeroed that. Let's see how much that one weighs if we've packed it in a bit more. 60 grams, okay? So just in half a cup, you can imagine if a recipe called for 3 cups of flour, just in half a cup, that was different by 47 minus, so 13 grams on 60. What percentage is that? 15, 20% roughly, a fifth? Yeah. So 20% different in the different methods of measuring. I really want to make sure that that one's clear. When it comes to baking, baking by weight is so much more accurate than thinking you've got it right by volume. I hope that one's clear, okay? So that same half a cup done the scoopy trick was 47 grams. Then we did the packing trick going around like that, and it was 60 grams. So very, very big difference there. Okay, so I'm going to put that back in and get our appropriate 65 grams that we're looking for. Okay. There we go. Let's zero that one. And then now, because we're going to go according to the scales, it doesn't matter how we measure the volume. We just want 65 grams. So we keep going until we get there. There we go, 65 grams. Oh, where are we at? Did it go down on me? 67. That's okay. We're going to add an extra 2 grams. Okay, so that's our coconut flour. Tapioca starch is another good example. This is a very powdery flour. So in this one, we only want 25 grams. So you can see that when you go by weight, and especially if you were to triple this batch or quadruple the dry ingredients, it's much easier to times your number by 4 than it is to have to measure that many times perfectly and accurately into the bowl. Excuse me. Okay, so tapioca starch, we want 25 grams. Oh, I added a little bit too much already. So we don't need too much there at all. If you really had no idea how much 25 grams was going to be, then you could measure separately so that you don't overdo it like I did a little bit there, but we'll make that work. Okay, now coconut sugar. There are other options for this. If you don't want to use coconut sugar, you could be using Rapadura sugar. You could be using a really dark brown sugar. But I think as far as quality goes, the darker the color of your sugar, the chances are there's more nutrients left in it. They haven't been stripped out. So here we're aiming for about 80 grams of sugar. Now for a brownie recipe, this is not very much at all, by the way. Most brownie recipes have a cup to a cup and a half, if not 2 cups of sugar in them. So there, I added 6 grams too much, but that's all right there. While I think of it, I'm just going to give the coconut cream a little stir, so hang on. You might want to do the same. We're still good. Nope, not even hot yet, so we're good to go. Okay. And then we're up to the cacao powder. 25 grams of that. Not too hard when we're using a scale. And like I said, once you do this a couple times, you will start to know exactly how much you need to add to get this bang on. But how much easier would it be if we could just take out a premix and figure out exactly how much we needed to add for the premix. Okay, now a little bit of a secret ingredient, the instant coffee. You do not need to add this, and I would not add it unless you have organic instant coffee. Not all instant coffees are made the same. In this case, this is literally just freeze-dried powdered coffee that was organic coffee, whereas they can be using a lot more of the chemical processes when it comes to making non-organic instant coffee. So for this one, 1 big tablespoon, or approximately 5 grams. Okay, that one had our coconut oil in it, so scoop that one in. And very optional. It doesn't end up tasting like coffee with only that amount in it, but it just gives it a nice kind of richer, I guess more embodied flavor. So I like to add that one, but absolutely not necessary. Now, here's where we start to do a little bit more healthifying of the recipe. So when it comes to adding the flax meal, I know it's only 3 tablespoons, but that's 3 tablespoons more than most brownie recipes will call for. And this is such an amazing fiber for your gut, for maintaining a bit of regularity, and also for providing the healthy brain fats, the omega-3 fats. So at least if you're making brownies for your kid to take to school, or maybe you're making brownies to take to school, kids, then this is going to help you have a little bit more brain function as far as the healthy fats in the brain. So adding in that bit of fiber is very important. Try not to skip that step. So that's our flax meal. Then the psyllium husk powder. Now notice how there's no eggs in the brownie recipe. Now this is one of the secret ingredients that we can use in place of eggs when we're using a gluten-free recipe. So this is just psyllium husk, which normally is a little bit chunkier than that. So all I've done is put the psyllium into the coffee grinder to grind it into more of a powder. So when you buy it in the shops, it'll be a bit more flaky than that, whereas this is a bit more powdered. So we do not need much. A little bit goes a long way. We're going to go for 2 teaspoons of the psyllium powder. And believe it or not, 2 teaspoons, this is a very good fiber for the gut. So we do not need a lot of it. And it does provide a nice texture to the brownie too. It's a little bit more of that kind of fudgy, chewy texture that we're after. Okay, so still building our dry mix here. All we need is 1/4 teaspoon of both baking soda and baking powder. Seems a little bit silly, you know, you think, oh, it's only 1/4 teaspoon, but it does make a big difference. We don't want the brownie to rise like a cake, but we do want it to have a little bit of lift and a little bit of action when it gets into the oven. So 1/4 teaspoon of bicarb soda and 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. And with these ones, we do want to make sure they're fairly accurately measured, fairly level. So 1/4 there each, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Because I have the 1/4 out, 2/4 equals 1/2. There we go. And if you wanted, and if you had powdered vanilla instead of liquid vanilla, you could add the vanilla to your premix and save yourself a step as well. So I'm going to take the advantage of that. 2 teaspoons of vanilla. It is a bit precious, this stuff at the moment. It's very hard to come by, apparently. Organic vanilla powder. Okay, there we have it. So that's all of our dry ingredients. We haven't missed yet, we're good there. So let's give that a good stir. And actually, while we're at that, I don't know if I had zeroed that from the beginning, but must have, yeah, okay. I was gonna say, we'll get you an exact amount on how much dry mix to add in there. I'm gonna do that for you actually, so that we can give you that data. So now, if you've done a double batch, a triple batch, a quadruple batch, we obviously wanna make sure that everything is very well mixed, because we're only using that 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda and baking powder, right? So we need to make sure that that gets evenly through this entire premix. This is going to be made a lot easier if you were to do your double or triple batch in a food processor, because then you can get all the little chunks out and blend it up really evenly by using your machine to do the work. So that's normally how I do that one, but it's just as easy in a bowl. Okay, now I'm going to go to that one extra step. I'm going to get an extra bowl and I'm going to tell you exactly how much the dry mix weighs so that you know how much to add per batch. Okay, let's zero that one. Okay, so our dry mix, including the vanilla, is say 270 grams worth of premix. So that's how much you'd use, 270 grams, if you'd already done this and you took that out of the pantry as your brownie premix to make your brownies fresh. Okay, we are so close. Now all we have to do is toss in our 200 grams of berries. Now you could be using fresh berries or frozen berries. In this case, I'm going to use frozen. So we can do that now. Nice if they are still frozen enough to not mush together. So these have been out of the fridge or out of the freezer for a little while, but they still hold separate, which is quite nice. And by tossing them into the dry mix, it's actually going to ensure that we have pieces of berry to bite into rather than just putting that flavor evenly throughout everything. So that's only about 100 grams that we've got there. Let's add the other 100 of mixed berries. Yum. Someone's gonna get a lucky strawberry in there. Okay, and then we can just give this a little toss, just to coat the berries. And again, this is just a little personal preference step, because I like biting into a brownie that I can taste the piece of fruit. I don't want the fruit to be evenly mushed through the whole thing and then I lose it. I can't really detect it. Okay, so that's our dry mix. That's ready to go. Come on back. Let's finish the melting of the chocolate. Okay, so this is quite warm. We don't need it to boil. We just need it to be warm enough to melt the chocolate. So I'm going to turn that off now. Hopefully yours is up to speed with us. And then now, because I've got the heat off and because I'm going to be here stirring it, we can't burn the chocolate. This is how we'll just melt it in. Now in the recipe I have said to reserve half a cup's worth of that chocolate. And the reason for that is just if you want to be biting into actual chunks of chocolate when you bite into the brownie. Personally, I'm happy just biting into the pieces of berry, but if you wanted, then that would be another option. So the only thing with that is it'll delay you just slightly, because once you stir this through the wet mix and then you add those extra chunks of chocolate, chances are this will still be hot enough that they'll melt in anyways. So you just, if you want the separate pieces of chocolate to bite into, you just need to let this cool down before you do the whole mix and add the rest of the chocolate pieces. So we're really close. We just want to make sure that this is all cohesively melted into the coconut cream. Smells amazing. Hope you guys are getting some good smell-o-vision. There we go. It's getting creamy. Just as a bit of a side note, what we've already added into here, the coconut cream, the coconut oil, and the melted chocolate, you can actually make this a dessert in and of itself. So by taking this and fully melting it down and then pouring it into little containers or little ramekins, and then putting that either in the fridge or the freezer, you can have that just as a dessert in its own. It's kind of like a mix between a chocolate ice cream and a chocolate mousse. So that's a yummy treat as well, and you don't need much of it. It's quite rich. And I like to serve that with berries as well. So this is just one extra step to make it into brownies. Okay, so we're fully melted in there. Just stay right here. I'm going to bring over that dry mix, and this is our last step. So we could go this one into that one or this one into here. I think it'll be easier for dishes if we go this way. Put all that guy in there. Okay. Give it a final stir. But let's not do too much mixing because I want to keep those berries intact. And then we'll pour it straight into our brownie container with the baking paper in it. You can already start to see the action of the baking soda. So the baking soda is first to react. The baking powder takes a little bit longer. Generally takes the instigation of heat and a little liquid. So you can already start to see those bubbles happening from the baking soda. Okay, now the only thing I'm going to say here about cooking time is it's going to depend on how big of a container you've ended up using. So the wider the container is, the flatter the brownie is going to be, the faster it's going to cook. So you just have to be a little bit conscious of that. Even though I believe I've said 35 minutes on the recipe, you may or may not need to adjust by a couple of minutes, just if you've got a thinner or thicker batch. And it also depends on how you like your brownies. Some people like them quite, what other people would say undercooked, quite really soft. And other people like them fairly firm and a little bit more kind of overdone. So completely up to you. You'll just have to cook it and adjust the temperature a little bit longer. And because there's no raw egg in here, you can eat it raw. I'll save the licking of the spatula for later. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to put this straight into the oven. And then instead of waiting the 35 minutes and just talking your ear off, I'm going to just now explain what to do when we take them out of the oven. But let's just get those in there, get them happening. And I'm going to start with 35 minutes, I believe. Okay, so a couple of keys. If you set the timer, and the recipe should have taken a certain amount of time, there are lots of different factors that can affect it. One of those factors is the oven type and how it cooks. The other one is how big your dish was or the type of material that your dish was made of. The other thing can simply be the types of ingredients that you use. So you can imagine if all of those factors happen to add up in the same direction, we could have a very differing amount of time that needed to bake. And it's a recipe writer's nightmare pretty much, is coming up with a time that's gonna work for everyone, which is why so much testing has to go in. So when it comes to baked goods, first thing that you'll notice is you'll start smelling it in the house. You'll start smelling the flavor of the end result. And that's your first sign that, oh, it might be done a bit sooner than we thought. So if you really get a strong smell of the finished product, that's your first sign to go and check the oven. When it comes to brownies, you can't necessarily do the finger press test because we kind of want them soft in the middle. So that's not necessarily going to give you your best indication. So what I prefer to do with brownies is to check the edges. If the edges are starting to be quite crisp, dry, you can't really tell that they're brown necessarily because it's brown to begin with, but you can probably tell that they're a bit darker than the rest. You should be done, especially if you're close to the 35-minute mark. That's kind of our guideline. So really pay attention to that. Start to develop your feel when it comes to baking. And the more you practice it, obviously the more you'll learn and the easier it's going to get for you. So that's that. Then the other thing is I want to just mention to make sure you let them cool for the easiest amount or the easiest cutability and the easiest hold. So it's going to take them a little bit once they cool to form that nice fudgy on the inside and crispy on the outside brownie. So be a little bit patient with that. Otherwise, serve them with fresh berries, however you like eating them. I like to just keep them in the freezer. They don't last too long though. And otherwise, if you've got no other questions, anything else for me, thank you so much for coming to cook with me. And I would love to see the photos and maybe the photos of the disappearing brownie act from you later. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next Cook With Me. Good night.